This is Chen's book, and this is Chen is coming from. He's actually on a ferry. The ferry is coming from China to Japan, and is carrying June. June is June was Itoh's lover, who we talked about earlier. June was supposed to get out of the camp when Itoh made his way out, but never did. And so this is Chen's book represents the passage of June to Japan. The weather was unbearably warm for the end of October in the north, where the dock jutted out into the Yellow Sea. She could have imagined the two-story ferry from her remote Manchurian town. When she finally arrived at the platform, June hesitated and looked back again. Even to the last, she was unsure. How many times had she made this fateful departure? The men were off in their own world, worrying about how they might busy themselves on the long voyage and what mischief they might find. "The boat's pushing off," said Sheen. She met him an hour ago when Chen unloaded her to his brother for safekeeping while he went about other work. Now this stranger appeared to read her mind. The strangers were always the first to understand. He watched her as she sat on the dock tearing at her newspaper, picking it apart letter by letter. "Once we go, you'll never come back," he said. "It was better then to never know. But you've gone this far." Shin was to observe cargo while his brother disappeared into a crowd. Duty called the itinerant tea drinkers and card players. The sea took its hold underneath them. A heavy charge filled the silence as the ferry engine surged. She looked for something to give her balance, but only found Shin's presence. He made himself all too available. His brittle parka brushed against her, and a sense of revulsion came over her. "I need hot water," she said. A simple request to turn his zeal in other directions. He grunted. Hot water was easy to find early in the voyage, but Shin would have to set out to fetch it. Shin paced around her for a moment, reluctant to leave her alone. June reached inside her coat to produce some proof of legitimacy, though paper, she knew, meant little to any of them. Shin clucked and stuttered in the direction of Chen and whatever chums he had quickly amassed. They stood far off of the easterly railing where they had slowly turned to the business of gambling. A great center beam divided the boat and partially hid the men from view. By the time Chen appeared, 12 hours had passed, and the weariness of the travelers took hold. In the meantime, June had probably slept, though she could not remember hot water or tea. Likely, Shin had not returned. "They're all from the north," said Chen. "They come this way to avoid Darien, so none of them will be sent to fight, or so they think. They've come all this way only to turn around and go home, but in the end, they'll be fighting. They say on the last push 1.5 million died, like pebbles in the ocean, aren't they?" "Why would they go back then?" asked June. "You'd know better than I," said Chen. "I do this for money." He was too vague to provoke some response from her. Though she paid him to cross the sea, he assured her that she was entitled to little. "You seem more desperate than the rest." "You've done this 100 times, haven't you?" she asked, in a dependency of hers pushing him on, but providing no details. "You've paid your fare," he said, "so we get to Fukuoka and you figure out the rest. But I need to get to Tokyo." "But that's not where we're going," he said. "And if I pay more?" "Pay as much as you like," he said. "We're still not going to Tokyo. Too many Americans, too many police." Chen looked up as his brother approached. She thought Shin might be more accommodating in conversation, since Chen was not going to be the one to calm her nerves. Chen grabbed hold of a small bag he carried and began pushing through the crowd. The collective on board was committed to the ferry's path, and all eyes cast a stone fortitude in the direction of the stern. "But I've already paid him once," June said. "He likes to be paid as many times as possible," Shin said. "But how will I get to Tokyo?" she asked. "Shifting priorities," said Shin. "You'll have to keep pressing your case." 3 days before, June had found Chen, one of a few smugglers hawking their services in the unknown cities of the north. June went to the town leader and asked him for help. She explained her problem to him, and he recommended the railway station as the place to find the kind of person she was looking for. Between the station and the tin goods market was a ponderous stall in the middle of the street. 3 beggars were looking for a meal. The choice was easy. June had not thought to ask how Chen had arrived there. She was so committed to accomplishing the task that very day that as soon as she gravitated toward him, she believed her work was as good as done. She failed to recognize the outward bearing of a fox. She asked the price to enter Japan. He did not object, nor question her motives, nor complicate with further detail. She watched him as he fingered through the buried ferry tables. His dim response suggested that he could easily accomplish what she asked, but he tripled her price. Before they had arrived in Beijing, there were other stops in the north, along the barriers of the ancient Mongol path, then further south. Chen left her standing in the marketplace without a thought, and more than once she had to work to find him. Amid the carcasses and the pelts, once she had to... Chen was consumed with the search for a weapon. He passed the leather tanners. His head spun from the stench of the oils, all trapped within the tent and ready to be scraped from the carcasses. But he knew what he had come for, and as quickly as June had found him, he decided upon a sleek, very modern pistol. June noticed at least half the money he quietly demanded leaving his hands. She gawked up at the beaver pelts and the yak skins. She could hardly believe she had undertaken this on her own. In Tianjin, it was much the same story, when Chen turned away, only to count his money a second time. She decided he was considering how much effort to put into the transaction. Would he, in fact, follow through on what he was paid to do? She noticed the train approaching, but neither she nor the train had jarred his attention. An intimate story to one was worth a nickel to another. Chen looked out the window and stared down the aisles. Bored with your abacus, she said. She realized the abacus only occupied a place very near his heart. This Macarat, he gleamed, off on his own tangent, has taken an incredible journey to find me, like Mao's long journey, but in the opposite direction. It was the first used in the northwest, near Lake Baikal, the dealer told me. He said it took 2 days to cross the 49th parallel. This was one of 100. With hundreds of thousands of Chinese rushing the parallel in winter, a Macarat's worth more than gold. An armistice would only increase its value. On the ferry to Busan, June had nightmares that all would be lost to gunfire. She woke in a sweat, but she took comfort in knowing that Chen had taken the strip before, and that no matter what unnecessary cruelty, he would arrive at his destination. This gave her confidence that her own mission might be fulfilled. A shabby-faced, remorseless creature climbed aboard with the rest of those awaiting uncertain prospects on the next stage of the journey. No doubt Japan would be unwelcoming for them, Shin said. Already she had transformed herself, hardened herself like not so many years ago. The war hasn't ended, she said, just dispersed to other locations. What Chen says will happen always happens, ma'am, said Shin. He dropped the formal greeting. June fixed on the stranger that had emerged from the crowd, only to watch him grasp Chen's hand and offer him a leather wrap that almost certainly contained money. Chen did not look inside, merely felt at the leather to test its contents, and confirmed the payment size. From a distance, June thought that he might be Japanese himself. His eyes were taut, and they betrayed the soft lines of the Korean women. His dress was certainly Chinese, although he had rid himself of any signs of the party. Chen says we'll get you through. He talked to the officials that worked the docks. The money you gave was not enough, but he found out what he needed to know, said Shin. Chen coughed. Phlegm came up his pipes. June understood that his abacus was counting. Then suddenly he was nowhere to be found. June knew he was tending to business more important than her own.